All right, so welcome everyone to a brand new deep dive. And today we're going to be tackling, I think, a pretty fascinating topic.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at the early years and the rise of Donald J. Trump.
Big topic.
Yeah, huge topic.
Yeah.
And we've got these learning English materials, which basically lay out his biography. And I think what we want to do today is really kind of tease out some of the key insights into those early ambitions and his moves in the business world in a way that hopefully you can kind of take away some nuggets.
I think it's really compelling, to examine someone's kind of formative stages when they become such a globally recognized figure.
Right.
So these materials provide a really good, I think, starting point for understanding that initial trajectory.
Absolutely. And, it all starts in Queens, New York with young Donald. And,
Right.
He's watching his father kind of establish himself in real estate.
Yeah.
But right from the start, his aspirations just seem to completely dwarf his father's projects.
Yeah.
And the material actually opens with this really intriguing idea. It says he had dreams of not just owning buildings, but of owning the world.
Wow.
That immediately tells you something, doesn't it?
It speaks to a very expansive vision, I think, from a young age.
Right.
Not sort of a localized impact, but something much grander in scale.
Yeah. So let's dive into A Dreamer in Queens, which is our first chapter here.
Okay.
And right away, it makes it clear that, Donald Trump's upbringing, it wasn't exactly ordinary, right? His father, Fred Trump, is described as real estate giant.
Yes.
I mean, that paints a picture of, significant business success within the family.
Yes. Fred Trump was really a substantial developer in New York.
Right.
Primarily concentrating on housing for the middle class.
Okay.
So provided not only a very comfortable upbringing for young Donald, but also a direct exposure to the world of property and the processes and possibilities there.
But the material really stresses that, young Donald had much bigger things in mind. He wasn't interested in those more modest homes that his father was involved with. Instead, his focus was on skyscrapers, luxury hotels, casinos, the kinds of ventures that really grab attention and project an image of just immense scale.
Right. It suggests, I think, a desire not just for financial success, but a very visible, almost monumental form of achievement.
Exactly.
And recognition.
Yeah, and there's this great story in this first chapter about him as a teenager looking at the Manhattan skyline.
Yeah.
And he reportedly said to himself, "One day I'll build the biggest tower in this city."
Wow.
And when he shared these ambitions, people laughed at him. People laughed at his dreams, but the text makes this crucial point. Donald never listened to doubters.
Yeah.
That seems like a really foundational aspect of, his early approach.
It does. This ability to hold on to that conviction in his own vision, even in the face of, skepticism or outright derision.
Right.
It seems to be a real recurring theme we see throughout his journey.
Yeah, and, this chapter introduces some key vocabulary, which I think helps us understand kind of the landscape of his early ambitions.
Okay.
So we have empire, which is defined as a large and powerful business or territory controlled by one person.
Okay.
Then we have real estate, which is simply buying and selling property.
Right.
A skyscraper, which I think we all know is a very tall building.
Of course.
And then a doubter, which the text defines as someone who doesn't believe in you.
Right.
So, these terms really kind of set the stage, I think.
They provide, a useful framework.
Yeah.
That aspiration to build an empire in particular,
Yeah.
Really resonates, I think, with the trajectory of his career.
Exactly.
And the scale of his later ventures.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to chapter 2, the rise of a business empire. And we see a really critical turning point, I think, at age 28.
Okay.
This is when Donald Trump takes over his father's business.
Yeah.
And significantly, I think, rebrands it as the Trump Organization. That name change itself, it feels like a real shift in direction and ambition, wouldn't you say?
It does. Moving away from that sort of family-centric identity and towards a more singular individual brand.
Yeah.
And I imagine that this rebranding was also aimed at projecting a more modern, maybe even more aggressive image in what was a very competitive New York real estate market at the time.
And then the text tells us that he did the impossible with the completion of Trump Tower in 1983.
The impossible.
Yeah. And they call it his first masterpiece, this golden 58-story skyscraper in the heart of New York City.
Wow.
And the source really emphasizes the significance, stating that it sent a clear message of his ambition to dominate.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think about the New York skyline at that time, how significant of an achievement was this?
Well, it was certainly a highly visible and impactful project.
Right.
It's a distinctive design and that really prominent location on Fifth Avenue.
Yeah.
It signaled a move into the highest echelons of New York real estate development.
It really did.
Impossible. Might be a bit of hyperbole, but it was certainly a bold and very successful undertaking.
Yeah.
And one that elevated his profile considerably.
But he didn't stop at just, one iconic building.
No.
The material quickly kind of broadens the scope to his other ventures, mentioning casinos in Atlantic City,
Right.
luxury hotels, and even an airline.
An airline.
Yeah, this shows a real appetite, I think, for expansion, into diverse and high-profile sectors.
Absolutely. It suggests a desire to not be pigeonholed or limited to one particular type of business,
Yeah.
but rather to build a presence in a whole variety of industries that are associated with, luxury, entertainment, travel.
Yeah.
And this diversification, I think, likely served to further enhance that Trump brand and reach a wider audience.
And speaking of the brand, Chapter 2 really emphasizes how central branding was to Trump's strategy. The consistent use of Trump in gold, giant letters, it's almost become a visual signature.
Yes.
And the text quotes his belief that branding was everything. And looking back, it's hard to argue with the power of that, consistent image.
Yeah, it was a very deliberate and effective strategy, I think, for creating immediate name recognition.
Yes.
And associating it with a certain level of whether perceived or actual prestige.
Right.
And it's a core element of his business philosophy that extends beyond just real estate.
Yeah. And the vocabulary from this chapter really kind of reinforces these key ideas.
Well,
We have masterpiece, which is a great work of art or creation, which aligns with how Trump Tower is presented.
right.
To dominate means to take full control, which reflects his stated ambition.
Of course.
And then branding, which is defined as creating a powerful image for a company, something he clearly understood and implemented.
Yes. These definitions really capture, I think, the essence of his approach during this period, aiming for these landmark achievements
Right.
and making sure that his name was prominently and powerfully attached to them.
Right, and then Chapter 3 kind of marks a significant shift, in his public life.
Right.
Moving into this foray into media.
Uh-huh.
By the early 2000s, the text reminds us he was already a billionaire,
Right.
but he also became, and I quote, a showman.
Yeah.
And this seems like a really pivotal transition that broadened his influence in a whole new way.
It was a strategic move to leverage his business success,
Right.
to gain widespread public recognition beyond the financial world.
Yes.
And television provided that platform, to cultivate a distinct persona and connect with a much larger segment of the population.
Right, and the main vehicle for this, of course, was The Apprentice,
Of course.
which premiered in 2004 and became a massive hit, capturing a huge American audience. What do you think made the show so successful?
Well, I think it tapped into several popular themes, the allure of wealth and power, the drama of competition,
Right.
and that seemingly direct and decisive leadership style that Trump projected.
Yeah.
That aspirational element of winning a coveted position within his organization, I think also held significant appeal for viewers.
Yeah, and the show's basic premise was, fairly straightforward, contestants competing for a job in his company.
Right.
But the real staying power, the thing that really entered the cultural lexicon, was Trump sitting in his leather chair
Yes.
and delivering that iconic phrase, "You're fired."
It's ubiquitous.
The source emphasizes its massive cultural impact, calling it a catchphrase and a legend, and stating that Trump became bigger than ever because of it.
Wow.
That's a pretty strong assessment.
It is. But that catchphrase was instantly recognizable,
Right.
and it really became a defining element of his public image.
It did.
Reinforced that persona of a tough, no-nonsense executive,
Yeah,
and permeated popular culture through parodies and everyday conversations,
absolutely.
and undoubtedly amplified his celebrity status.
Yeah, and the vocabulary in this section really reflects this shift into the media spotlight.
Okay,
So a contestant is a person who competes in a game or show.
makes sense.
A catchphrase is a famous or repeated saying.
Right.
And a legend refers to someone famous for a long time. And I think these terms really encapsulate his transformation from businessman to a nationally recognized media personality.
It does. This period significantly expanded his brand recognition and cultivated that direct connection with a vast audience.
Right.
Which proved to be, I think, a crucial asset in his later endeavors.
Which leads us to Chapter 4, The Unexpected Politician.
Oh, yes.
And the text really highlights his ambition moving beyond the realms of business and television into seeking power
Right.
in a political sense. And I think for someone with, such a drive for influence, this feels like a logical, if surprising, next step.
Yeah, it represents a significant expansion of his ambitions, I think,
Uh-huh.
from influencing, markets and popular culture
Right.
to seeking direct influence over public policy and governance.
Yeah, and in 2015, he certainly caused a stir when he announced his candidacy for president of the United States from Trump Tower. And the source points out the initial reactions. People laughed. A businessman, a reality TV star, a president.
It's understandable.
It really underscores how unconventional and unprecedented his entry into presidential politics was, at the time.
There was widespread skepticism, given his lack of, prior experience in an elected office or traditional political roles.
Of course.
And his background in business and entertainment was seen as a significant departure from that conventional path to the presidency.
Right, but the material emphasizes that, Trump had a core message, make America great again.
Yeah.
And his speeches are described as simple but powerful, noting that he spoke like a businessman, not a politician, and that this resonated with a significant portion of the American public.
Right.
What was it about this unconventional communication style you think that connected with people?
I think his direct and often unfiltered style cut through what many perceived as, overly polished and evasive political rhetoric.
Yeah.
Speaking like someone who was outside of the traditional political establishment, I think appealed to voters who felt alienated or ignored by mainstream politics.
Right, and the vocabulary in this chapter really reflects this new arena of politics.
Right.
So to announce means to officially say something.
Okay.
A politician is a person in government,
Right.
and a campaign is the process of trying to get elected.
Makes sense.
These are really the fundamental terms of this political world he was now navigating.
They are.
Yeah.
Understanding these terms, I think, is essential for grasping his transition from a private citizen and media figure to a candidate seeking public office.
Okay, so Chapter 5 covers the 45th president.
Right.
It recounts his victory in 2016, described in the text as against all odds.
Wow.
It characterizes his presidency as a period of significant activity and division,
Yeah.
calling it a storm that included trade wars, immigration bans, Twitter battles, and global debates.
Yeah.
And it also notes those highly polarized reactions, stating, some loved him, some hated him, but no one ignored him.
That's true.
That feels like a very accurate, albeit concise summation of his time in office.
I think so. His presidency was indeed marked by, as you said, a high level of activity across various policy areas.
Yeah.
And, a deeply divided public response to his actions and his leadership style.
Absolutely.
And I think significantly, his use of social media as a primary communication tool
Yes.
really altered the landscape of presidential communication.
Yeah. So his leadership style is described as unapologetic, his words as bold, and his impact as unforgettable.
Yeah.
These are strong descriptors that, regardless of individual perspectives, seem to really capture the nature of his presence.
I think they do. These adjectives highlight that direct and often confrontational nature of his leadership and communication.
Right.
And it really was a defining characteristic of his time in office.
And the vocabulary here includes against all odds, meaning succeeding when no one expects, which certainly describes the outcome of the 2016 election for
Yeah.
many. Unapologetic means not afraid of criticism, which seems to align with his public persona,
Definitely.
and impact, which is defined as the effect someone leaves behind,
Right.
which in his case is undeniably significant and, continues to be discussed.
Absolutely. These terms, I think, help contextualize the surprising nature of his ascent to the presidency and the distinctive characteristics of his time in that role.
So finally, we arrive at Chapter 6, Legacy, Love Him or Hate Him.
Okay.
And the text acknowledges that, while he's no longer president, it says his influence, it's still everywhere. He changed politics, business, and media forever.
Yeah.
That's a pretty sweeping statement, I think, about his enduring effect.
It is, but I think his presidency and his continued presence in the public discourse have undoubtedly left a lasting mark on the American political landscape,
Yeah.
the media environment, and perhaps even aspects of, business communication and branding.
And then the chapter pulls out some key takeaways from his story, things that, might resonate with us even beyond this specific biography. Things like confidence, branding, fearlessness. These are themes I think we've seen pretty consistently throughout his journey, haven't we?
Yes, they appear to be these recurring threads
Yeah.
that run through his career narrative.
Right.
From his early ambitions in real estate
Yeah.
to his ventures in media and his eventual, foray into politics.
Right. And the chapter concludes with a really, I think, resonant message. It says, and most importantly, never listen to doubters, because in the end, it's not about what people say about you. It's about what you build.
Right.
It brings us full circle, back to that young dreamer looking at the Manhattan skyline.
It does.
Yeah.
It's a fitting conclusion, encapsulating his, long-held belief in his own vision
Right.
and his determination to pursue it despite, external skepticism.
Yeah, and the final vocabulary really reinforces these lasting ideas.
Okay.
Confidence, believing in yourself,
Okay.
fearlessness, not being afraid to take risks,
Right.
and legacy. What you
Yeah.
leave behind after you're gone,
No.
these are presented as the key concepts to really glean from his story.
I think those are important considerations when reflecting on his career trajectory
Right.
and his broader influence.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into the formative years and the rise of Donald J. Trump.
We have.
We've examined the journey of a Queens boy with these immense ambitions.
Right.
His relentless pursuit of those dreams in real estate and beyond, his, unexpected and impactful entry into the world of media,
Yeah.
and ultimately his ascent to the highest office in the United States.
We really have explored the development of a figure who, through this combination of ambition, branding, and a willingness to really defy expectations,
Absolutely.
has left a significant mark, I think, on contemporary society.
And that leads us to our final thought for you all.
Okay.
Considering the distinct phases of his career,
Yes.
real estate development,
Yes.
media personality, and political leader, which of these do you think ultimately had the most profound impact on his trajectory and his overall legacy?
That's a tough one.
It's a question I think worth considering as you reflect on the narrative we've kind of unpacked today.
It is.
Think about, how the lessons of ambition, branding, and resilience might apply in your own pursuits.
Right?
We hope this deep dive has offered you some valuable perspectives.
Yeah.
We look forward to our next exploration together.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.